distinguished guest, Mr. Blair Levin.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. It's great to see people. I want to again thank Dick for inviting me. The only thing about your award, I thought you had already received every possible award. I think I'm up to a half dozen. It really is great to all be together. There's so much to talk about. We could talk about money. In the last couple of decades, I've had thousands of conversations with investors about how policy impacts stocks, and I can tell you what stocks will rise and which ones will fall. But you are all policy wizards, and talk of money is so beneath you. So I'd like to take the opportunity to talk about things that we aren't talking about, or things that we're talking about in a weird way. And I'll wrap up with some questions that were higher on the policy agenda. Let's start with a tour of the weird in our policy world. What is the fastest growing news source in the United States? TikTok. Americans getting news from TikTok has tripled since 2020, over 30 million. That's not what's weird. Here's what's weird. Federal law prohibits TikTok from buying a radio station in Juneau, Alaska. Population 30,000. Why? Congress wanted to keep foreigners from influencing news coverage. Mission accomplished. But fear not, we may soon ban TikTok. Thank Commissioner Carr. His dazzling PR campaign advocating banning TikTok earned him prominent coverage in every important newspaper, news show, and a very coveted non-oversight appearance before Congress. It was more coverage than all other FCC commissioners garnered on every other issue combined. But that's not what's weird. What's weird is neither Carr nor the FCC had any jurisdiction over TikTok. Now, Carr argues that the FCC-related expertise on network issues gives them the expertise to weigh in, and that's fair. And I think more important, he and his allies have leveled very grave charges. Count one. TikTok functions as a sophisticated surveillance tool that harvests extensive amounts of personal and sensitive data. As the four largest American companies by market cap also fit that description, an FCC commissioner arguing that being a sophisticated surveillance tool justifies a ban is kind of like Captain Renault in Casablanca saying, he's shocked that there's gambling going on in the casino. Except that instead of shutting the casino down, he just kicks one gambler out. Kind of weird. Count two, foreigners shouldn't have that personal data. Carr quotes a general who warned foreigners with such data may expose Americans to blackmail, recruitment activities, or undue foreign influence in U.S. policymaking. That's a good point. How does he apply that to Elon Musk, who reportedly allowed major Twitter investors access to personal data, including a Saudi prince, a Qatari sovereign wealth fund, a cryptocurrency exchange based in China? Just a guess, but they're probably more dangerous than the usual suspects Captain Renault would round up. Count three, TikTok is subject to CCP pressure. Senator Rubio noted any company operating in China is going to be pressured and exploited by the Chinese Communist Party. Again, how to apply that to Musk, who has extensive business involvement in China. Concerns from Rubio? When asked, his spokesperson pointed to a Rubio tweet saying concerns reflect far-left fears about losing power to censor conservatives. Which is kind of weird. It's kind of tribal weird. Count four, TikTok is a network security risk. Maybe, but it's not like we don't have others, and with apologies to Kathleen, T-Mobile just discovered a security breach affecting 37 million customers a year after it discovered one affecting 76. Now, the House Commerce Committee has detailed plans for oversight hearings on 8 broad communications topics, including data security. Guess which example they focused on? Hint, not the ones affecting over 100 million Americans. Who had TikTok? Bingo. Count 5, and this is the most serious one in my book. TikTok is digital fentanyl, as it is highly addictive and destructive, giving rise to troubling data about the corrosive impact of constant social media use, particularly on young men and women in America. Now, if communications platforms are used like fentanyl to kill people, we really should be outraged. And actually, that did happen. When COVID broke out, a popular radio host told millions, among other falsehoods, that COVID was not any different from the common cold, that it was just Democrats attempting to stop Trump from holding rallies, And COVID-19 was the 19th coronavirus, and therefore common and nothing to worry about. So if TikTok is fentanyl, what is COVID misinformation that more likely caused people to act in ways that led to their deaths? Did anyone in government advocate banning Rush Limbaugh? No. We gave him the Medal of Freedom. It's kind of weird. It's kind of dark weird. But Carr's right that data showing a negative effect on young people is a call to action. What's weird is why only TikTok? What about Instagram's impact on young women's health? Or social media generally causing a Gen Z mental health crisis? And let's look forward. What will be the biggest social problem in the US in the year 2030 that rides on communications platforms? I think the answer is obvious. It's going to be young men gambling online, particularly sports gambling. And what are we doing about it? The New York Times reported, to reap millions of dollars in fees, universities are partnering with betting companies to introduce their students and sports fans to online gambling. And government oversight of sports betting offers scant consumer protections and looks to the industry to police itself. Does anyone from the FCC who have related experience on communications and public health, do they want to jump in? Nope. But policymakers on all sides want to jump into the fight against TikTok. Why? Which political pundit has most accurately described the motivation here? I'd argue it's Rene Girard, and I bet none of you had him on your bingo card. He was a Stanford literature professor, recently passed away about 10 years ago. And his works describe the scapegoat mechanism, how human history is rooted in dealing with desire, jealousy, and resolving conflicts through an in-group creating and punishing a scapegoat. The China connection makes TikTok a perfect scapegoat for politicians in the media. Now, I want to be clear, they are not all wrong. China is a threat. Maybe TikTok should be banned, I wouldn't know. The problems they raise, though, I know they're serious. Thinking they only apply to TikTok, however, is not serious. Girard teaches that it's not weird historically to apply standards to the other TikTok that we don't apply to our own. He and history, tragically, however, teach that bending the rule of law to only apply to the other ends badly. Now, I have to confess, I only read Girard because my son made me. My son is my primary teacher these days. Actually, my two brothers are pretty good, too. He also made me read a book called The Dawn of Everything, a prehistory of Homo sapiens that describes indigenous cultures of the Pacific Northwest and Californians defining themselves in opposition to each other in a process that's referred to as schismogenesis. And that's happening today. Certain states, California and New York, define themselves in opposition to other states, Florida, Texas. And the states have passed many often conflicting laws affecting our sectors on many issues, privacy, net neutrality, kids' online safety, others. After I published a Wall Street note discussing schismogenesis and policy development, I got a very nice note from Commissioner Simonkin, and we followed up with a very nice conversation. The nice part isn't weird. He was born in Canada. However, it was the first conversation in 30 years I've had with any FCC commissioner, which began by discussing the behaviors of indigenous tribes 5,000 years ago, which is kind of weird, but nice weird. The bad weird is that it was the only recent substantive conversation I've had on state-federal relations and telecom and tech policy, something of immense importance. Are laboratories of democracy a good thing? Is inconsistent fragmented regulation a bad thing? I don't know. But the quiet in DC about it, that's the weird. Another reading my son sent me was in February of 2017 when it was a law review article written by a college classmate of his, then a third-year law student, entitled The Amazon Antitrust Paradox. I read it, disagreed with parts, but thought it was very impressive and told my son that. But I also noted it was really a shame that Trump won because now no one would read it. I further opined that his classmate, Lena Khan, would have been a shoo-in for a great job in the Clinton DOJ. But now she'd have to settle for just some fancy clerkship and we'd never hear of her again. Oops. Here's what's weird. For the last 2 decades, I've earned a decent living predicting things for Wall Street. Please don't tell them. Now, one of the reasons we've heard of Khan is she discusses big things, important things. She even got more press in her effort to ban non-competes than Brendan got for TikTok. And she got a presidential shout-out in the State of the Union. Of course, she actually has jurisdiction, so that's actually not so weird. Alas, no presidential speech led for anything the FCC is doing. Now, the FCC is a very important institution. It oversees a huge input to our information economy, spectrum. Fortunately, and many of the people in the room were involved in this. 3 decades ago, we developed a method for allocating spectrum that garnered bipartisan praise, been copied around the world, underlaid 2 Nobel Prizes, and is arguably the most successful communications policy innovation ever. Unfortunately, Congress can't decide how to reauthorize that option authority. Congressional dysfunction, also not weird. The stakes are high, billions in investment capital, 10 times more in economic impact, and industry needs and deserves a spectrum roadmap. As the FAA fiasco and other spectrum debacles have shown, there's room for policy improvements. And by the way, in 2021, Commissioner Carr, totally to his credit, thoughtfully laid out his own proposed spectrum roadmap, for which he got no press. And that further, there have been several organizations in the last 6 months, Aspen Institute, Public Knowledge, Eno Center for Transportation and the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, have issued reports detailing needed spectrum policy reports. And these are really great reports, disclosure. I may have had something to do with some of them, but I didn't write any of the good stuff. They're really excellent. NTIA and the FCC are reportedly working on a national spectrum strategy. So with spectrum, at least we're talking about the things we should be talking about, but no roadmap or policy changes yet. So that's not weird, just slow, and in DC, slow is sadly not weird. But the current FCC has been busy on other things, reforming universal service, redoing the broadband maps, administering the Affordable Connectivity Program, known as the ACP. Universal service faces economic, legal, and institutional challenges in a landscape changed by historic federal investments. Congress wisely asked the FCC to address how USF should adapt to those changes and challenges. And in 22, in July, the FCC sent Congress a report proposing about a half dozen major rulemakings. How many have been completed? How many have even been started? I think it's the same answer for both, which is 0. But if I'm wrong, someone can correct me. And I think that's weird. As for maps, we've been waiting since 2021 for the final FCC map so NTIA can send the states the correct allocation. Here's what's weird. Far better maps already exist. Apple and Android phones know the strength or absence of every wired and wireless signal everywhere. The ISPs also know. They make multi-million-dollar capital decisions every year. And do you think they would do it with bad maps? No. One lesson from my Wall Street years, the private sector has much better information than the government. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not criticizing the FCC staff for their maps. I do not want to get into scapegoating. I'm just here to observe that the political and media forces that influence government priorities themselves never prioritize improving information gathering. And that's a big problem. As Cass Sunstein demonstrated recently in the Journal of Benefit Cost Analysis, effectiveness requires regulators to close their knowledge gap. But what agency has ever been motivated to act by an article in the Journal of Benefit Cost Analysis? Maybe Harold was motivated to ask, but nobody else. Now, as to the ACP, the North Star communications policy should be to make communications faster, better, and cheaper for all Americans. Yet next year, about 50 million Americans could find that their communications capabilities have become slower, worse, or more expensive, if they have access at all. And the reason? ACP will run out of funds. As Congress found, you can't participate in the economy, society, civic life without a broadband connection. Now, former Commissioner O'Reilly wrote a very smart editorial laying out the conservative case for the ACP. Some might find it weird that a conservative supports a social welfare program. As Mike's op-ed demonstrates, it's not. What's weird is, despite bipartisan support, ACP funding is nearing a cliff. And if you remember nothing else from the speech, remember my Cassandra cry that our country may soon take the biggest backward step any country has ever taken in increasing rather than closing the digital divide. I'm a Biden fan, but was sad he did not call for refunding ACP at the State of the Union, nor did he cite communications technology as a solution to any problem we face. Here's a question. What's the best thing we could do for the country by 2030 to pay the biggest dividends in 2040? You could argue infrastructure, green energy, many things. But here's my answer. Taking the steps necessary so that by 2030, 90% of fourth graders read at a fifth grade level. Why? Well, first, we're already falling behind in reading. Only 33% of fourth graders are proficient in reading, lower than 2019. Second, the biggest predictor of how many prison beds a state will need in 10 years are fourth grade reading scores. That's actually not really true. But it shows up in a lot of stuff. And it's more true than a lot of stuff that's said in DC, which I know is a low bar, but this is totally true. 70% of all incarcerated adults cannot read at a fourth grade level. We could argue about correlation and causation, but what's inarguable is that raising reading scores for the rising generation will create massive economic and social benefits. And third, the combination of communications networks and AI make it now possible for new forms of tutoring that can be personalized and hugely effective. Of course, that opportunity depends on sustaining the ACP. Now, I know what I think important may not be what the president thinks is important, but still, because of communications becoming faster, cheaper, and better over the last 3 decades, are the policies, and a lot of you in this room are responsible for them, are in everybody's pockets, their homes, their schools, their cars, their work, their places of worship, everywhere. Faster, better, cheaper communications literally saved the economy and kept civil society afloat during COVID. It can do much more here and around the world. But to get there, we need different conversations. They have to stop being weird and start being serious. The pillars of our media policy have been localism, competition, diversity, protecting kids, and public safety. Do we still care? If so, how do we protect them? How do we protect against foreign interference in our modern media ecosystem? If media is demonstrating devastating consequences for the health of many, particularly young people, how do we recapture the principle that communications networks should not be used to harm the public for personal health? How do we limit the damage of online sports gambling, which is going to be awesome, and the damage is going to be huge? How do we protect against the abuse of personal data from any source, foreign or domestic? Are periodic breaches of our networks the cost of doing business, or can we design incentives to keep them from repeating? What is our spectrum roadmap for the next decade? How do we prevent future spectrum policy debacles that have cost literally billions of dollars without any societal benefit? How do we protect universal service, the vision, against its multiple challenges? And again, how do we avoid taking the biggest backward step ever taken, increasing rather than closing the digital divide? In Clinton's 1994 State of the Union, we heard only of the upside of technology. In Biden's this year, we heard only of the downside. How do we establish a policy framework that encourages the upside while protecting against the downside? Are these issues the sole obligation of the federal government, a shared responsibility of the states, or is it left to the states? What information should we be collecting so that all these questions can be answered more effectively? In short, how do we have a sober, fact-based debate that develops principles, rules-based regime that discourages and punishes problematic activities, whatever its source, and provides incentives to deliver the public interest benefits we need? How do we focus on solutions and not scapegoats? These are hard questions. I don't know the answers to any of them. I do know if we don't have the debate, we never will. And I don't know why the FTC lawyers these days are the ones who now get to have all the fun. And for the FCBA lawyers in the room, I don't know why they get to have all the big billable hours. That's just rude. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
Blair, Lynn Stanton, Daily.
Hey.
You sound very pessimistic about the ACP, and I was just wondering if there are any factors or potential factors you see out there on the horizon that could turn the corner for that.
So I think the principal factor in my pessimism is that I'm Jewish. I can say that. No, look, there are signs of hope. I've talked to lots of people. There are some people who say Congress will reenact the funding, but I see lots of, if we're arguing about the full faith and credit of the United States, and if funding is going to be a problem, and I see Republicans are now going after food stamps, which has been in existence for a very long time, the notion of funding something, even if it's small, like $6 billion a year, let's put it this way. I would love to be wrong. I think it is the single most important policy. I think if we're going to increasingly do everything that we do will require a connection. And the notion of 30% of America being essentially precluded from that is a horrific scenario. But if it's, if I'm wrong, great. But like I said, that's a Cassandra cry because you want to avoid that. And by the way, I see no evidence that there's an organized effort to save it. I know there are efforts to save it, but I see no evidence of an organized effort to save it. Other questions? Yeah.
Blair, you mentioned that Lena Khan has jurisdiction to write rules on non-competes.
Well, that's actually it's a question.
Okay, it's a
but
question.
She certainly has more than Brendan has over TikTok. So.
Right. So do you think the Supreme Court will agree that she has jurisdiction to ban non-competes?
So there are lawyers in the room who could answer it better than me. I think one of the really great things about my career is, though I did practice for 10 years, I really wasn't that good a lawyer. And so I don't want to opine on that. I know what the debate is, and I accept that if you look at the Supreme Court, you would probably guess no, given the way the makeup. Though I would also argue that if you look at the 230 argument of a week ago, you would see a traditional Supreme Court where you can't really predict how people are going to come out based on who appointed them. But what I would say about this is she has struck a debate that is going to be, I think, very, very influential. That there are a number of states who already have it, and I think that there are going to be some states who, if she's not allowed to adopt it, they will be pressured to adopt it. Now, I also think that the rule will ultimately not be the rule that she's proposed, that, at some level of income, if the company wants to non-compete, it's much more justifiable than at a lower level. So, but this question of the ability of the FCC to adopt rules, I think is a really interesting one, but I don't have an informed opinion about that. Other questions?
Yes.
Questions on media? What do you think the future of broadcasting is in this country?
So I think as to all media, it goes up in importance and down in importance, but it never goes away. Movies did not kill live theater. Television did not kill movies. Streaming does not kill broadcast. Having said that, though, it keeps going down. I would, in the short term, this raises the issue of what the FCC did Friday in the Tegna deal. I'm happy to talk about the legal and process issues as well, but from an economic perspective, the question is, how do broadcasters make money? In the old days, broadcasters could make a lot of money just by running ads because they had basically a unique market. They don't have that anymore. Now they do, like local news is a unique product. Television advertising works much better on local, there's all kinds of things. It's a complicated analysis. But the way to make money when you lose a very significant pot of revenue is through scale. And that's just the way markets work. And we could have a debate about what the meaning of the Tegna decision is. And my friend Andy probably may well disagree with you, but I can tell you from a Wall Street perspective, what the meaning is any deal involving broadcasters now comes in with much more significant risks than one would have thought a few weeks ago. And what that means is that the scale advantages of broadcasting are going to go down, and that could be a problem. Look, Dick, you and I, the first time I met you, you were introducing me to this thing that you called high definition television, that my boss Reed called digital television. But the question then was, what does this mean for the future of broadcasters, and how will they take advantage of it? Is there something more than just a pretty picture? So far, the broadcasters have not been able to take advantage of new technology for anything other than prettier pictures. They haven't changed the revenue model. So when I look at the revenue model, I go, no, I don't know. Let me just mention one other thing. Ezra Klein in the New York Times, a very interesting piece, I thought, on the question we're not asking about artificial intelligence. And his question was, what business model will drive the development of it? You know, right now it's kind of like a science experiment, but at the end of the day, people are going to use it for a business. And he has kind of a different fear than other people have, which is that artificial intelligence might be so effective in advertising that it's kind of unfair because they know so much about you and they can drive ads. Well, you know, if you can really do that so well, then I don't know that broadcasters actually, if somehow they know you're about to buy a car and they can flood you with a bunch of information, what do you need a broadcaster for? The final little thing I'll say in that subject is, many years ago, you I'm sure know the story, Mel Karmazin went to visit the two Google guys around the year 2000. Google wasn't what it is today. And they said, we're going to make advertising so much more efficient. And Mel said, are you crazy? My whole business is about the inefficiency of advertising. Radio is, you know, that great line about 50% of all advertising expenditures are waste, we just don't know what 50%. If you can actually make a more effective platform and you can target it so that you're only spending money and causing a buy, I think it's very problematic what the future of broadcasting is. I saw another hand coming up somewhere. And let me emphasize something. I don't know where Catherine's Kathleen? What's up to go?
She left.
Oh, then I don't have to. No, seriously, I wanted to be clear in citing the problems that T-Mobile have had. There's actually a very serious problem here. Running networks is a hard thing to do. I wouldn't know how to do it. T-Mobile, I think, has done an extraordinary job. But they have had these breaches. And the problem from a regulatory perspective is if you make them overbuild and spend tons of money to solve 10 times the amount of problems they're going to have, you're going to waste a lot of money, and that's going to result in higher prices for everybody. On the other hand, if you don't, you get these security breaches, which are also really bad. So what's the right balance? And my point is, if we're just all focused on TikTok, and we think that's the problem, and TikTok is a problem, but if we're only focused on TikTok, that's also a big problem. I don't know what
No, you think, well, I think that's it, Blair. So thank you for a very fascinating